Claire, I think people here probably know, but you should give a little bit about your background. And I think that what we're really excited to talk about here is that we are approaching the 5-year anniversary of Filecoin's launch and the 10-year anniversary of the white paper. So, Filecoin was DePIN before DePIN existed. And so there's a lot of kind of interested to kind of hear your perspective on the evolution over this decade.
Yeah, well, first off, thank you for having me. This is honestly my favorite event, every single major crypto conference, because in the room, there's the highest quality people that really do care about building things that matter long term. And I think everyone in this room that has touched DePIN or are interested in it know that it's not easy. When you really touch infrastructure and physical devices, you really have to think about it as a long-term investment. You can't just launch an NFT or launch a meme and then disappear a year later. So a little bit about my background. I've been helping co-run the Filecoin Foundation since its announcement around 5 years ago at the start of the Filecoin network mainnet launch. As Tom mentioned, Filecoin has been around for quite some time now. It was started by Juan Benet in the Filecoin white paper that was written actually in 2014, but was publicly available in 2016. And since the beginning, the vision was, how do we really think about major breakthroughs in computing, but also really what does that decentralized network look like for us to be able to do that successfully? And in order to do that, IPFS in 2014 was created to really allow for peer-to-peer file sharing, but in order to incentivize long-term data storage that is constantly available, Filecoin was really created and announced in 2016 to allow for that. And you can imagine the marketplace of data that we live in today and also living in the future with the rise of AI. So what really brought me to the blockchain space and specifically storage is I spent a lot of years actually in a previous lifetime working in the counterterrorism world. So I was at the White House and Homeland Security for many years. And a lot of the challenges when it comes to bad actors leveraging the web is really how do we prove an attribute where content comes from? When a terrorist posts a message, or it could be foreign influence operations, you want to be able to really source where the data came from and how it was manipulated or changed over time. And since around a decade ago, we saw the rise of disinformation and misinformation on the internet, where it became much more difficult to prove the source and actually also make sure that it came from a device that journalists today, when they're taking on-the-ground photography, can actually say, hey, this actually came from this place, and I can actually maybe one day use it in international criminal court if it's in the instance of what's happening in Ukraine today. So that's really my why for being here and focusing on Filecoin the last 5 years, is really, I'm a strong believer that today we're living in the world where trust in data is more fragile than ever. I was just playing around with a ton of new AI apps this morning, and you're seeing more and more realistic videos and other forms of media being able to be produced. And I think we have to be able to have companies of all kinds be able to securely verify that data, but also make sure that data isn't misused in the wrong way, where companies today can sell your data with or without your permission or with or without you knowing. And we really want to make sure the future of the internet is fully distributed and that entrepreneurs can continue to build on this nest. So, yeah.
Well, then let's talk about that. Agree entirely. I think that's a combination of what you guys do, what blockchain does overall, what compute does, et cetera. But talk about the evolution and the success and the traction of Filecoin from the white paper to today, right? There's 1 exabyte, maybe more of data stored. There's 20, whatever, of capacity. Help people understand sort of the scale of that, what's stored, kind of how you see that kind of traction.
Yeah, I mean, I can kind of give a timeline. I think that's helpful to paint the evolution. If you imagine where blockchain was a decade ago, 2014, 2015. So in 2014, DePIN really didn't exist at that time. A lot of what existed in blockchain was really Bitcoin and how you can program money on top of Ethereum, but Ethereum at the time was really just an idea. And so even since a decade ago, we've seen the community evolve tremendously where, as Tom presented some figures earlier, there's over 2,000 projects in the last 5 years alone that are now evolving in the DePIN space. Many of them are in this room. And there's also tons of billions of dollars of value that the network has created. And we've seen a lot of acceleration in physical infrastructure that just wasn't possible when you think about centralized companies being able to do this level of work. Specifically for Filecoin, the first few years after its mainnet launch was really focused on how do we build as much availability in storage capacity. And so that was really year one, was we were able to build the world's largest decentralized storage network from a capacity standpoint. In years 2 and 3, so this is like 2021, 2022, we were really focused on making sure we can test the network and think about cold archival storage and large data sets to make sure data can be secure. So we've backed up so many incredible data sets, all the way from, if you've used Internet Archive in the Wayback Machine, a copy of that is being stored on Filecoin. We've backed up government data sets. Some of government data sets today are fragile. Government institutions sometimes can't be trusted to maintain key data sets. We've also looked at hot storage, which includes NFTs. So if you own an NFT, you're probably already storing on Filecoin. But one of the big metrics we've looked at in the last 2 years is really not just capacity and amount of data stored, but the quality of data. And so we really want to make sure that the data that we're storing today is actually being used by different people. We've also looked at a lot of AI agents built on top of Filecoin, which actually allows us to be able to discover even new things from data archives that wasn't possible before. One example of this is a great nonprofit we work with is called Muckrock. They're in charge of Freedom of Information Act requests from the US government. And so these are mandatory reported documents. And we've backed up all of that on Filecoin and IPFS. But we also had an AI agent crawl on top, so you can actually discover new data sets and new insights that journalists can use. And we called that the CIA agent, because you can now make new insights about CIA files from over the years that normally would take a historian many years to even just dig through those PDF of files. And so I think there's so much that storage can unlock today, and also what it can do for the future. This fall, actually on the heels of DevConnect, if those of you are going to be in Buenos Aires, we're going to actually have a few more exciting announcements. There's major upgrades to the Filecoin protocol that are going to really make it possible for even more ability to build on top of Filecoin, especially from a payments angle. So there's even more ahead.
Well, that's terrific, and I think storage is so important. You kind of think that the decentralized world can't exist without decentralized storage, right? That is a fundamental key thing. You guys are by far the leaders. There's dozens of other projects approaching storage. And in fact, we have several here today that are going to be speaking as well. And so your success has inspired lots of other followers who each are doing different kind of niches within it, right? But you guys have clearly laid the groundwork and have set it up over this past decade and have the most significant traction by far of anybody, and I think it is still just a tiny, tiny piece of where storage is, and it's a market which is growing dramatically, right? So I guess maybe talk about you can talk about that, but I'm also interested in the ecosystem overall development, right? When you started, you were the only DePIN project, even though DePIN didn't exist. Now we have DePIN projects, a lot of DePIN projects. You mentioned 2000. Talk about the kind of involvement that you and that Filecoin and the foundation have been in the DePIN community, because you've been huge supporters, of DePIN Day, of all kinds of things. So kind of that community involvement in DePIN, I think, is really important. I'd like to hear about it.
Absolutely. So the Filecoin Foundation and also the Protocol Labs network actually has tons of companies that are part of it. I think around 600 companies have come through. A lot of them actually are in this room that might be building a DePIN startup today that may have gotten investment or mentorship or have connected to other companies through the network. One of our big beliefs is that the more DePIN projects there are, we're going to see a lot more application of being able to have much more decentralized end-to-end use cases using data and beyond. And we truly believe that, today there are so many different players in the blockchain space that say they're decentralized, but really don't have it at the infrastructure level. And so there's, high risk of a single point of failure when it comes to especially the most critical asset that they're owning, whether that's user data or key financial information. So we've worked with so many projects in this room, WeatherXM, decentralized weather stations. We've had ongoing conversations with a number of other DePIN projects. Fluence we're very, very close with because
early investors in Fluence as well.
Yes, and when it comes to really thinking about the full DApp, decentralized application stack, Fluence is really the brains doing the compute, and you can imagine Filecoin is that data library, and you kind of need both in order to really do fully decentralized applications to replace the experiences that we see today using centralized applications on Google or other centralized platforms. So there's just a handful of examples, but if you can imagine, WeatherXM sitting in the front row, they're using the Filecoin network today to be able to reward people for contributing accurate weather data sets to the network. And so there's so many additional ways that Filecoin as a marketplace allows for entrepreneurs to build layers on top. And that's really why we're here. We want to make sure that we can also really accelerate the growth of the DePIN sector.
I think the integration that DePIN projects can do with the data layer that Filecoin has is really important. I also think that the platform you provide to the DePIN ecosystem and to DePIN projects is also very helpful. And so all of the different events that you've done, the mentoring that's available, and the community that you guys kind of foster is also very relevant. They, Protocol Labs and Filecoin Foundation helped sponsor, for example, DePIN Founders Dinner just earlier this week, where a bunch of DePIN founders were able to get together and talk in kind of a quiet environment, different from kind of the cocktail kind of crush of a lot of events. And so there's examples like this that I think you guys have the resources, but also the motivation and initiative to schedule and to effect, which I think is very important. So hopefully that continues, because I think people here all appreciate it. What do you see going forward? If you're 10 years in now, what are the milestones you would like to achieve in kind of any of the metrics, either from storage, from community, from DePIN? Where do you see the future here?
Yeah, I think the elephant in the room is, while there's a lot of benefits to decentralized storage, decentralized compute, any kind of DePIN project, it is tremendously more difficult to do it when it's decentralized. And there's a lot of things that we're still evolving. For example, retrievals and hot storage. It's accelerated tremendously since 5 years ago, where a lot of what we could store at the time was just cold archival storage. Now we have a handful of startups that are building the application layer on top of Filecoin that can do all kinds of retrieval and hot storage, and that's only getting better. But I would say that what's ahead is really thinking about what data looks like 5 to 10 years from now. Even by the end of 2026, some studies estimate that 90% of new data on the web is all going to be AI generated. People are starting to use it more and more. And so we're really thinking about what does data look like in an agent-to-agent world. We're looking at what does data look like as we have more growth in the DePIN sector for more companies that really want that fully decentralized stack. We're also thinking about really the Web3 space and how do we make sure that we have the right rails in our ecosystem, but also we can help partners along the way too to be able to do payments fully on chain, and really also accelerate that to the work that we're doing in the Web2 space with enterprises, and really not just get them on board, but also teach them why that's much better than what they use today in more centralized storage experiences. So
what is the gating items to growth? It seems like there's a lot of storage availability in the network. But to get that, you have to have customers, you have to onboard. Is it sales? Is it the physical onboarding, which I know is an issue with huge data sets? What is, if you could solve one problem or one hurdle that would help you scale faster, or is it development resource? What do you think is the main obstacle to accelerating growth?
Yeah, I actually don't think it's demand, and I don't think it's lack of interest. Actually, the hardest thing, and I will say, like, there's probably tons of projects in this room that feel similar, is we are actually a very decentralized ecosystem. I know there's some crypto projects that say they're decentralized, but maybe have one or two entities running, making the calls, but we really have a lot of participation and governance from the entire community. But that is actually, unfortunately, sometimes makes it harder for us to get to consensus on quick decision making. When we're thinking about new upgrades or changes, or even new products to launch, we can't just go to a product team and say, ship it. We really have to convince different teams to build and ship it with us. And so for us, it's actually just from a governance function, how do we quickly get people on the same page to be willing to test and iterate on new ideas? I think that's probably the biggest bottleneck, but that's just the very nature of working in a decentralized way, is you do unfortunately sometimes have a longer runway to make sure everyone is actually comfortable and on board. And at the same time, the beauty of that is you get to think about all perspectives from the community. And we have thousands of storage providers all around the world building data centers. Some of them are huge, running 100-person operations. Some of them are smaller operations, but they all have different needs that every time we have a major network upgrade or we're shipping something new, they need to also feel like they're on board and can be convinced that this is for the benefit of the network. So I think that is very much the challenges of not just us, but anyone that works in a very decentralized ecosystem.
Right, and it's actually interesting because a lot of the trend now is to centralize in DePIN, and so DePIN becomes CPIN a little bit, right? And so the decentralization priority has been reduced, right, over some time, and we'll see how this SEC decision impacts that. But that aside, what advice would you give to DePIN projects? Would it be don't decentralize too fast, or is there other advice you might give from your experience at Filecoin at the Filecoin Foundation over this period?
Yeah, I mean, I would say stick with what you believe in. I think most DePIN projects actually have a much harder time with fundraising or getting traction, sometimes considered to what is comparative in the acceleration in the DeFi space, for example. And the reality is the majority of users in crypto are plug and playing somewhere in DeFi. Infrastructure is 10 times harder. And I would say keep your eyes on the North Star and think in decades, not in short-term years, because a lot of this comes with long-term planning and strategizing. And when we think about comparable services and infrastructure, DePIN is already growing at a tremendous speed. I mean, this is the fastest growing infrastructure space is right here in DePIN. And so I think it's easy for you to get distracted and say, okay, in a crypto conference like this week, it's so easy to see other people have very quick milestones to things, but keeping your eyes on the North Star of this is why you were brought to the table of playing in the DePIN space. And I think everyone also has their own sector that they're trying to adhere to, in addition to Web3 investors or those that might be on your cap table. But you kind of have to appease both. We spend a lot of time in actually traditional infrastructure and Web2 enterprise spaces. And so sometimes there's people in Web3 that don't hear about Filecoin as often because the biggest factor in, for example, decentralized storage is going to be enterprise adoption. And so that's why we spend the time there. But I would just say keep your eyes on the North Star. Don't let outside noise distract you. And Juan Benet, who started Protocol Labs, he is probably one of the smartest thinkers in long-term thinking out there. If you've ever listened to any of his talks, you can really see how systems work, how economics work over time, and some things just take a little bit of time and just be patient through it.
Yeah, well, I think you mentioned something that's interesting, which is the B2B aspect of what you do. You want enterprise customers, but you need B2C because you want the token buyers and the community to understand what you're doing. So you have two audiences, and you can get a lot of traction on the B2B side, but you got to have the C, the consumers, also in the crypto ecosystem, be aware of what you're doing. And that's kind of, so you're sort of, no matter what you're doing, you still have two very different audiences that you are kind of need to be aware of you and you have to appeal to?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that is definitely one of the hardest challenges is being able to know who your audience is for different places and being able to appease both, because a lot of the Web3 audience may just want snappy updates. There are projects that I won't name in the blockchain space that have zero revenue in the actual value of service they offer, but they do a lot in just pumping their token. And so, you know, it's challenging because there is a lot of projects that do get a lot of funding from just noise itself. And I think a lot of people in this room wouldn't be touching infrastructure if you didn't really believe in the value of what your service can help deliver and make people's lives better. And so I would say, you know, definitely a lot more challenging, but I would say long term, it's going to create a lot of value for this world, much more than just seeing a token price go up.
Yep, and we're excited for that. I think that, you know, we need to see this work in order to be free, effectively, right? Like, without decentralized storage, without decentralized payments, without decentralized everything, it is completely effectively a centralized oligopolist world where we lose any autonomy. So I think that the Filecoin is kind of a core project in helping enable that world. Any kind of closing thoughts for the DePIN community, for the Filecoin community, for where you want to see Filecoin or DePIN be 5 years from now? What's your vision, something you can kind of point to? Like, when we're sitting here at token 2049, you know, in 2049, it's a little more than 5 years away, but, you know, same concept, that will happen. Anything you want to kind of highlight for people to be, as something you know, then we've been successful? Well, Filecoin will be successful in 5 years if we've done this, or DePIN, I want DePIN to achieve this over the next period.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a lot of the future that we've imagined in each of our spaces, no matter what sector of DePIN you touch, is a world that most consumers today can't even explain. And I think that's really hard, because if you imagine the early days of a service like Airbnb, nobody would really agree to say, I'm going to stay in a stranger's house of people I don't know. And they had to not only educate people, but explain why it's so different from a hotel experience, what to expect and not what to expect. And people can't just think about it as an apples to apples comparison. They can't just think about it from a price to price comparison. There's so many intrinsic value that each DePIN network offers today that replaces so much and more to users in a customizable way that you just can't do when it comes to centralized tech. And I think that's really kind of my big push for all of you guys is help each other lift up each other's projects. So I think the more examples of other people seeing DePIN projects succeed, the more that we're going to get widespread adoption from every single player. I mean, I'm very excited personally to see the growth of how many other players in decentralized storage have emerged since around 10 years ago, because it shows that this is an area where there's a lot of interest and other people also see a similar vision, that data shouldn't be necessarily centralized and owned by a few large corporations. And I think in the world of 2049 or whatever, you're gonna see a lot of, in my opinion, you're going to see a lot of people dealing with a lot of challenges with AI. And it might be content creators today that can't prove ownership of content they create. There's going to be a lot of interesting copyright challenges from a lot of brands. And people at the end of the day want to be able to store, verify, and fully own their data instead of necessarily being reliant on huge bills that major cloud companies can change the price point at any single point in time. We've also worked with a lot of scientists, for example, that are doing incredible experiments, some running on AI today for breakthroughs in neuroscience or elsewhere. And a lot of these also require people to be able to store at a cost-effective way all of their data. So I really do think that people are gonna really see the challenges as we see the growth of and use of AI, of why owning your data is so important. And then on top of that, why running your compute and your GPUs and everything else becomes even more critical on top of that stack, which is why I'm also very excited with what Tom and Fluence are doing. Fantastic. Well, thank you. That's the right answer. Got to be excited about what Fluence is doing, so thank you. I want every panelist, everyone up here has to say that. Otherwise, they're not invited back. So thank you, and thanks for Clara. Let's give a round of applause for Clara. Thank you.